Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to IJCAI 2017. IJCAI, the first International Joint Conference on Artificial Intelligence, was held in 1969, almost 50 years ago. And so 2017 is the 26th such conference. And we're here in Australia for the second time after a gap of about 26 years. We were in Sydney in 1999. So it's very nice to be back here. Now, AI, of course, is quite relatively old, a bit more than 50 years old. But recent DNA studies have indicated that the Aboriginal people of Australia form humanity's oldest continuous culture, between 70,000 to 60,000 years old. And so today it's our great honor to be welcomed by Perry Wandin, an elder of the Wurundjeri tribe. Perry?
Thank you and good morning. As you heard, my name's Perry Wandin and I'm an elder and I'm very proud of that. First of all, I'd like to pay respects to elders both past, present and of course the next generation coming through and of course elders that could be here today. My story is that my father was Narangita, meaning headman for Wurundjeri, also known as IIIA tribe, that beautiful lovely coloured yarra you just see at the front there, which is don't drink the water please, don't even swim in it. But what happened here back in 1863, how my father became Narangita was William Barrick. Now William Barrick is my great uncle and he was the headman of all the clans in Melbourne because our territory is Melbourne and the greater up to the Great Dividing Range, which I'll explain shortly. William Barrick, along with other 30 to 35 people, women, children, were forced out of Melbourne and put into a beautiful place where my family still resides, called Hillsville. And there's a Hillsville Sanctuary out there too. For those international people here, if you get to go to the Hillsville Sanctuary, you will visit part of Corranderk Mission, and which is a beautiful area. You will see if you do get a chance. But when they were herded up to there, they were locked in a 200 acres, told that they weren't allowed to do any cultural events, anything, no culture, no language, which is our Wurrung language, which I will welcome you shortly. And they weren't allowed to pass it on, but they did in secret. But what happened with William Barrick, along with his cousin, Simon Wonga, they formed a group that could actually understand white man's law, because Aboriginal law is spelled L-O-R-E and the white man's law is L-A-W. And what they did, they handed it down to the next generation coming through so that they were all able to understand why they were locked up. Because if they weren't dying from the genocide that was happening in Corranderk Mission, because the meat was laced, the sugar, the flour, and especially all the young children were dying from diarrhoea, and you can name anything else that... and of course the attention they got was very minimal. William Barrick was allowed, along with other headmen who were also caught up in Melbourne, from Tunnarong and Watherong, to walk into Melbourne to Parliament House. They walk in 2 days in and virtually knock on Parliament House door with gifts and virtually walk home with nothing. All they wanted was another pair of shoes, another blanket, or even a jacket. But that 9 times out of 10 it didn't happen. But what happened in 1903, after all this time, they got to be a very, very big family group of just under 400 people. And if you notice in other clans in Melbourne, out of Melbourne, because our boundary's very, very wide, they looked up at two Wurundjeri people, IIIA tribe is also known, to follow their lead because we were the main contact in the Melbourne area. William Barrick passed away in 1903. Beautiful age of 85. Passed it on to my great-grandfather, Robert Wandoon, and then he became the head man. And I was just saying before, because Robert Wandoon's father was a white man, so he was a half caste. He was virtually, when he was born, the elders did grab him and threw him into that beautiful Yarra River, but that was up at Hillsville. And the women were quickly, from the farming side, grabbed it, cleaned him up and said, look, this is against our law. So they understood that. Thank God for that, because he became Narangita, the head man. And that went on until 1924, and when Coranderrk Mission was shut down. And most of our people went down, if anyone's down near Lakes Entrance, which is another 4-hour drive, they were walked, horse and cart down there, and a lot of our family is down there today. And then if they didn't, they went up to the Murray, a joint place called Cummeragunja. Now, we've had 1924 to 1985. 1985 was when the Wurundjeri Land Council became very prominent in Melbourne. We are much having fight with the Victorian government over titles, but where our land actually goes to. But it will happen. So what I'll do now is tell you what's actually happening is, because if I'm not doing this, I'm out working on site. Where any new development areas are going to go up, we will do a walkover first, see if we can still find artefacts. And yes, we are finding artefacts even in Melbourne. Not long ago, the Age building down here, they've done a car park and they went down 6 metres. They only found 6 artefacts, but that was dated back 30,000, and we know, as you've seen on the board, that they've found between 65 and 70,000. So they're there in the ground, and it's very important because it gets to tell the story of who these people are, and it's my people. My mother was English, and I'm very proud of that. And the good part of that, my grandfather's name was Harry Potter, so I've got connection on both sides. So look out there. I can wave the wand, and the other one is point the bone if you're in Aboriginal terms. But look, thank you for listening to me, and I'll give you a welcome in our Woiwurrung language, which we're getting back into the education system now, and it goes like this. Wamidjaka, Yemen, Kundibek, Wurundjeri Balik, and that means welcome to the land of Wurundjeri people. I hope you have a great day at the International, and it's Artificial Intelligence. So I hope you have a great 26th event. Thank you for listening to me, and have a great day.
And as a small token of our appreciation, IJCAI 2017 will be donating 20 robotic kits to the Yirrambala Wesley Studio School, which is a special school that's a unique initiative for furthering the education of Aboriginal children in the Yirrambala in the Kimberley area. Okay, and now I'll tell you a little bit about Melbourne. Melbourne is a leading high-tech hub for Asia Pacific, and there's a large amount of high-tech activity throughout the state of Victoria. And today we're also pleased to have a welcome from Kate Cornick. Kate is the CEO of Launch Victoria, LaunchVic, and it's an independent company set up by the Victorian government to further the Victorian startup ecosystem. Kate has a PhD in electrical engineering and has previously held senior positions both in academia and in industry. She's considered to be one of the leaders in Australia's telecom sector. Kate?
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri people, and their elders past, present and future. We have a very special story in Melbourne, and it does start with cultures that are far, far older than we can possibly imagine. I myself emigrated from England about 20 years ago to this wonderful city, Melbourne, And for those of you that are from Melbourne, and I understand there are about 500 people from Melbourne today, you should be loudly and proudly celebrating the fact that we're for the seventh year in a row, we're the world's most livable city. And for those people that are newly arrived, welcome, and I hope you managed to find time to enjoy our wonderful home. I'm delighted to be here today as the CEO of LaunchVic, the state government's agency for startups. Technology has played a phenomenal role in our society for well over a century, but it's accelerating at a pace that maybe we haven't seen before. It's challenging our society, it's challenging our community, and it's challenging our jobs. Never has there been a time when the future of work is so important, as we have created structures around our education institutions and our workplace for over 100 years that are being challenged on almost a daily basis. And artificial intelligence is playing a critical role there. As a technologist, I see this role as being critically important, as well as critically disruptive in the ways that many people talk about. And it's a real challenge for societies around the world, as we, people like me, have to talk about the importance of technology, the importance about starting new businesses, new ideas, and disruption being a good thing. But it is challenging, and it means that a lot of people are losing jobs. A lot of people are spending many thousands of dollars studying for careers that may not exist when they graduate from universities. But we can learn from our past, and it was only 100 years ago when people were really challenged by a thing called the automobile. The car was going to be the most disruptive thing in our society. It was going to cause people to lose jobs. I had a great pleasure of hearing the US ambassador, or former US ambassador to America, from America to Australia, Jeffrey Bly, talk about how in the States there were real concerns about how blacksmiths were going to have their jobs disrupted because people wouldn't need horses anymore. People's jobs were cleaning the streets of manure were going to lose their jobs because automobiles would mean that they would not be needed. But in actual fact, the automobile brought about many thousands of jobs. It was new jobs that perhaps at the turn of the century were really hard to imagine. But mechanics, policemen, petrol stations, and of course automotive manufacturing would never have existed if that technology hadn't come about. And this is where we find ourselves now with technology today. We, and you in the room, are leading at the very forefront, thinking up new ways to use knowledge and even new ways not to use knowledge. But it's endemic on all of us to think about how this relates back to our society, our communities, our jobs, and our cultures. Because without that, we won't be able to benefit from the disruption that's caused. We need to make sure that we're working really hard to generate new businesses, to understand what the jobs of the future will be, understand what the structures of the future need to be to manage the risks that come with new technology, and create a future that all of us are really proud to be a part of. And never has artificial intelligence been more front and center of that, as careers such as law, accounting, and other highly professional careers that have been in place for many, many decades are now being disrupted by the way that we are using technology and the power of technology. So I really, again, would like to welcome everybody to Melbourne and welcome everybody to this fabulous conference. You're leading our world, and we're putting a lot of trust in you to make sure that the research that you bring forward is making really fantastic change to our communities. And I wish you all the best as you go through the conference in the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Now, about the conference a little bit. We have a number of exciting things planned for the conference, but before discussing those, I want to turn to a moment of remembrance and reflection. In particular, a number of our colleagues have passed away over the last year, and I'd like to have a moment of silence for them. Adele Howe, Peter Hayek, Daniel Bobrow, Alain Comlia, and Seymour Paper. So if we could just have a moment of silence for them, please. They'll be fondly remembered. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about the conference committee. I am Fahiem Bacchus from the University of Toronto. Our program chair is Keynote from Spain. We have the great local committee, Arrangements Committee, Cheng-Chi Zhang, Toby Walsh, and Andy Song, and Vesna, our secretary for IJCAI, and Bernard Nabel, our treasurer for IJCAI. Of course, it's a large conference, and this small number of people couldn't have done it. We have many other people who did a huge amount of work, and we're going to thank them a little bit later in the conference, but I just put up their names for now. In addition, we've been very supported very generously by 42 different sponsors whose logos I've just flashed up here. Many of them have given us money that have allowed us, for example, to reduce the fees for students and to provide other scholarships and other activities for the conference. We thank them. The conference itself is organized by the associations that are the International Joint Conferences on Artificial Intelligence, the University of Technology, Sydney, and the Australian Computer Society. We thank them for their efforts. And I'd like you to enjoy, right now to invite you all to come to our closing ceremony on Friday, where we will have an opportunity to give greater thanks to all these people. They did a lot of work, volunteer work, that you are going to benefit from over the next week. A couple things I'll mention. We have a banquet on Wednesday night. This is for the non-student registrants. It's going to be held at the Peninsula in the Docklands. It'll have dinner, drinks, and some entertainment. It's about a 15-minute walk from the convention center, and we will have student volunteers leading walking groups and also along the path to show you the way. The students, we haven't forgotten you. There'll be perhaps a more interesting, more exciting reception for you on Thursday night at the Boat Builders Yard, which is right outside of the conference center towards the riverside. And we guarantee we'll have lots of food and drink for you. And for both of those events, for the banquet and also for the student reception, please remember to bring your badge to enter. And also for the student reception, we've arranged, a number of companies have asked us to do this, where they're going to have a table and you'll be able to talk to them about job opportunities. And that will occur in the early part of that event, between 6:30 and 8 o'clock. And like I mentioned, we have a closing ceremony after we've done all of the interesting scientific work on Friday at 4:30. And please come and join us for a final drink and snacks. And like I said, to give an opportunity for everybody for us to thank the volunteers that made all of this possible. And we'll have an announcement of the various competitions that have been running, and we'll present our gift to the studio school. We'll hear more about IJCAI 2018 that's going to happen next year in Stockholm, and we'll have a raffle for some exciting gifts. So please make sure you spend some time to do that. I'd also like to mention that in addition to IJCAI, a number of other people who are on our volunteer committee have arranged different things related to AI and related to AI and its societal impact, which I encourage you all to try to participate in. There's a general AI festival that's running concurrently with the conference. Its website is aifestival.com.au. You can also find it off our own homepage. It's been organized by Michael Georgiev, and it's going to feature a number of events revolving around the impact of AI in society, including public panels on the future of transportation, the future of work, and others. And of course, part of our role, as Kate pointed out, is that as scientists who have knowledge of AI, we have some responsibility to give back information, accurate information to the rest of society. So this is a venue that would allow some of us to do that. We also have the AI Lounge, which also has a link off our homepage. It's going to be organized by Toby Walsh, and it's going to be occurring every evening between 6 and 7. And in its format is a conversation between the public and different panels, AI experts, as well as question and answering from the audience. And you're all invited to participate. Again, it's going to be located right outside the conference center in what's called the cargo hall. And after the conference, we're going to have a bunch of co-located conferences that you might be interested in sticking around for. We're going to have the theory and applications of satisfiability testing, the principles and practice of constraint programming, and the conference on logic programming. Concurrently with the conference in the same convention center will be the 2017 Big Data Summit. Now, I'm going to turn the podium over to my colleague, Keynote, who is going to tell you a little bit more about the scientific program that you'll be enjoying over the next week. Carlos?
Thank you very much. Okay, thanks for making it here this morning. I know it was an early day. Well, a few highlights about the program. I've tried to compose a variety of activities for you during these 4 days. I mean, we have 7 invited speakers. We have 3 panels touching upon different exciting topics and very relevant to the current moment of AI. We've got, during the last 3 days, 39 workshops, very well attended. 7 of them related to the conference theme, that is autonomy and AI. There were 22 tutorials. 8 of them had more than 200 attendees. One of the tutorials was more than 400. So the tutorial program was very lively, worked pretty well. We have different kinds of papers, different kinds of tracks. We have the best papers of sister conference of a number of relevant and high-quality conferences that are going to be presented here. There are presentations from the journal track, which are papers published in JAIR or IIIA that have never been presented in a major conference that will give a description of the work. There is a robotic showcase. On the second floor, you will find a room with a different number of robots. And also at the basement here, you will find some RoboCup League competitions. There are 10 demonstrations. 4 competitions. There is a video competition and 3 other software competitions in room 206 and at the lobby at different times. You can have a look at the brochure for the details. The winners will be announced at the closing. There is an industry day on Friday that has been put together by Mike Georgiev, a very interesting day with startups and large companies discussing the use of AI in their businesses. And as was mentioned, we've got 8 collocated conferences around these IJCAI. This is the conference at a glance. You can see this in the online system. You have also in the brochure. Basically, the idea of the next 4 days is that there will be, apart from the invited talks, you will have sessions of papers. And at the end of the sessions of papers, sometimes with coffee break, sometimes without, you will have half an hour, a slot in which the presenters will have their papers on a poster, and then you can continue putting questions to them and discussing the idea. So if you don't have time, because presentations will be 12 minutes plus 3, it will be very difficult to accommodate all questions. You can save your questions for later and go to the poster and put them to the presenters. You have, as you know, the software event base in which you can plan your week, selecting which are the sessions that you are more interested. It works offline, so it's very easy that you at the hotel at night, you decide what to do next day, and you have alarms and all these kind of facilities. Okay, so this is the word cloud of the papers that have been submitted. As you can try and find the most relevant topic for you, but as you see, obviously, data deep appear as very important terms in this year's conference. The number of papers submitted was massive. At some point, I thought I would not make it to here. The amount of reviewing has been incredible, and I really thank you all for the tremendous effort you have put in all this process. Without you, I would be basically dead now. The submission has been raising since the last 4 editions. Now, we reached 2,540 papers. 26% were accepted. And the total papers in the proceedings are 750. That includes all papers from all the different tracks. As you see, the tendency shows that we might very soon reach 3,000 papers submitted to the conference. The topics of the papers You can have a look here for a few seconds to find where you can be co-located. But basically, as you see, machine learning is the major keyword used in this conference. Half of the sessions, I would say, roughly, are on machine learning papers. So machine learning is kind of growing and growing in the community as the focus of attraction. The papers were submitted according to this distribution. China submitted 37% of the papers. The European Union 18%, US 18%, and then going down. Very remarkably, 7% from Australia. In terms of accepted papers, China is the first country with 34% of the papers accepted. European Union 24, US 18, and Australia remarkably again 8% of the papers. So Australia is doing very well. The review process could not be made without almost 2,000 researchers working in the different roles, area chairs, SPCs, PCs. I tried to introduce a number of tools to facilitate a bit the job that we had. We used the Toronto paper matching system, where 80% of the reviewers uploaded their papers in order to generate 2.8 million matching degrees that were shown at bidding time, so that bidders, the bidding was a bit more informative. And actually, 71% of reviewers found it useful or very useful, the use of TPMS. We used Blaibonet's assignment program, and in the end, 74%, so 3/4 of the reviewers were satisfied or very satisfied with the allocation. I think overall, the management of the assignment of papers worked pretty well. We also use some of our technology, so we use a SAT solver to organize the sessions, to glue together the papers in sessions. This year, SPC and PC reviewed papers, and 80% of the papers received 4 or more reviews. All papers had 3 reviews at least. I also introduced a new peer assessment across reviewers, so that reviewers assessed each other's reviews. And then the area chairs made recommendations, discussed every paper with me in order to take final decisions. I'm also releasing, after this conference, a review data set that is obtained by anonymizing the data on papers and reviews from those that volunteered. 81% of the reviewers volunteered for that, 66% of papers volunteered for that. That will be released after the conference ends. This is the results of our own cross-evaluation. So what's the reputation of the reviewers that they made the reviews of this conference? And I give you a hint here. Everything above 50 means that the reviews are okay, are good. So as you see, below 50, the number of reviewers is very small. I took very, very much care in selecting the reviewers in the process, and I think it paid off in the end by having, according to our own opinion, a good set of reviewers in the process. These are considered by all of us as the best senior program committee members in reviewing. So you can, these people had well above 90 in reputation according to the assessments made. And these are the distinguished program committee members with values well over 90 according to the assessment. Okay, the proceedings followed a new editorial. Fahiem, when you think I should stop, I mean, you're keeping time, okay? So we have a new editorial program. We changed from last year to this year. We have a completely new process, new software, to try and improve the quality of the final proceedings. And I think it has been very successful. There have been a professional checking of the format, the quality of the paper layout. And there were 2.6 rounds of revisions of papers done very professionally, resulting in very good PDFs in the end, with rich set of the metadata, DOI registration for all papers, bib references, and in the end, more than 90% were satisfied or very satisfied with the editorial process. So I think it is a big success that will be repeated in subsequent conferences. The theme of this year is autonomy and AI. I mean, autonomy is on the media every day for good and for bad. I think we need to discuss a bit what are the limits of autonomy, where can we set the limits, what can we guarantee as safety in autonomous systems. Mike Lack took care of this particular track. There will be 3 technical sessions that will be a bit different for those interested on that. After the presentation of the papers, there will not be posters, but there will be a debate with the authors and the public attending the attendees in the session. I think that could be very, very interesting. There will be 1 panel today on the topic. There is 1 invited talk touching upon the legal aspects of autonomy. And there are other 3 that touch on different aspects of AI for social good that I think we have to stress very much in this conference. As I said before, there are 7 workshops, there have been 7 workshops that touch in different degrees to this topic. These are the invited speakers. We will have now Stuart Russell after we finish the opening, and you will have people talking on different topics. We'll not extend on that, but I mean, I think there is a variety of theory and practice in the set of invited speakers. The panel today on AI and autonomy, current opportunity or future threat. It will happen between 3 and 6. A panel tomorrow, AI and societal challenges, chaired by Ramon López de Mantaras tomorrow. And a panel on AI in 2027 that will be chaired by Maria Gini on Thursday. We continue the tradition started last year about the early career spotlights. So these are really brilliant young students that are developing a substantial amount of work in their careers, and they're given the opportunity to explain that in 30 minutes during the sessions these weeks. I suggest you have a look in the program and check for these early career spotlights that can be very interesting to listen to. On Friday afternoon will be couple of award talks being given by Devi Parikh, the Computers and Thought Award, and John McCarthy. John McCarthy's award given by Dan Roth. It will open to the public, so you may see people around that are not attendees of the conference. The Research Excellence Award this year will be Andrew Barto, and the talk will be postponed to IJCAI18 because he could not make it this year. Okay, so I'm about to finish my introduction to the program, and here is a list, as you have seen in the brochure, the finalists for the distinguished best paper. You can see here the 3 papers that made it to the selection. Now I will announce who is the winner, but I will not hand out the award. Okay, we're going to save a few minutes. So the certificate will be given during the session in which the paper will be presented, okay? And after discussion with the area chairs, this shortlist was made and the decision on the winner was made. And the winner of the Distinguished Best Paper, IJCAI 2017, goes to Mark Kaminsky, Bernardo Cuenca-Grau, Egor Kostylev, Boris Motik, Ian Horrocks, Foundations of Declarative Data Analysis using Limit Data Log Programs. It will be presented in the session KR-LKR2, Logics for Knowledge Representation 2, on Friday from 10:30 to 12 in room 2080. So let's applaud the winner of the Distinguished Best Paper. The finalists for the Distinguished Student Best Paper are these 3 papers. And I mean, they were all praised by the area chairs that took care of the selection of the papers. You can see the names here. In this case, the 3 papers come obviously from China or from Chinese authors. And I'm proud to announce that the winner of the Distinguished Student Best Paper goes to Xiaohui Wang, sorry for my pronunciation, Chang Xu and Dacheng Tao, Tag Disentangled Generative Adversarial Network for Object Image Re-rendering. And that will be presented on Friday as well in the session MLDL1, Deep Learning 1 on room 204. Join me applauding the winner of the Student Best Paper. Well, and that's it for me. I would finally try, I would like to thank everybody that helped me through this I would say sometimes painful process to go from the submission moment until here. I have been exchanging emails with almost 8,000 people between authors and reviewers. It has been a daunting task. And I really thank all the authors for their collaboration and understanding, and all the reviewers and SPC for their hard work in making this scientific program what I expect will be a success. So thank you very much.
And let's thank Carlos for the amazing job he did. It's a lot of work. Now we're going to see a presentation of the AI Journal Awards, and they're going to be presented by Rena and Patrick, who are the editors-in-chief of the AI Journal. So you just use the arrow keys.
Hello. It's our great pleasure to announce this year's Artificial Intelligence Journal Awards, and there are two different awards that we give each year. And the first one is the AIJ Classic Paper Award, and this recognizes outstanding papers published at least 15 years ago. And the other award is the AIJ Prominent Paper Award, and that recognizes outstanding papers published not more than 7 years ago in the journal. And for the Classic Paper Award, I'll give the floor to Rena to announce the winner.
The Classic Paper Award of 2017 is given to a paper published in 1997. The title of the paper is Fast Planning Through Planning Graph Analysis. The authors are Avrim Blum and Merrick First. I will read a few lines from the citations. The seminal paper changed the perspective on classical planning algorithms. Before the paper appeared, most of the planning approaches used back-chaining method searching in plan space. Blum and First instead proposed to create a particular graph structure in an iterative, deepening fashion for containing a backward search from the goal leading to the source. Now we will announce the prominent paper.
Yeah, so for the awardees, we're not going to have them come up now to save some time, so they should get in touch with us after this session or sometime during the conference. So for the Prominent Paper Award, this year it's a bit of an exception. We have two prominent papers because the topic area, the papers are so intertwined and connected. So there are two papers, and the first paper is BabbleNet, the automatic construction, evaluation, and application of a wide coverage multilingual semantic network. Authors Roberto Navigli, Simone Pealo Ponzetto. And the other paper is Yago 2, a spatially and temporally enhanced knowledge base from Wikipedia. And the authors are Johannes Hoffart, Fabian Suchanek, Klaus Berberich, and Gerhard Weikum. The print is shrinking as I look at it. These two papers have made outstanding contributions to the automatic construction of large knowledge bases and semantic networks from public domain sources such as Wikipedia and WordNet. So congratulations to the award winners, and let's give them a hand for the great work.
Thank you, Rena and Patrick. And now we have another award, this time by the IJCAI JAIR Best Paper Award, and this one is going to be presented by Francesca Rossi, who's the JAIR Editor-in-Chief. Francesca?
So this is an award given by the Journal of AI Research in collaboration with IJCAI, and is awarded to an outstanding paper published in JAIR in the preceding 5 calendar years. This year the winner is a paper on multimodal distributional semantics by Bruni, Tran, and Baroni. It was published in 2014. And the committee decided to recognize this work for its impact within multiple areas of AI, including natural language processing, vision, machine learning, and its seminal role in the introduction of a multimodal perspective in distributional semantics models for computational representations of word meaning. Besides this paper, who is the winner of the award, the committee also decided to identify an honorable mention paper. The paper is this one. It's about a system called Colin, Planning with Continuous Linear Numeric Change. It was published in 2012, and the work has been recognized by the committee for its impact within planning and beyond, and its seminal role in the development of hybrid discrete continuum planning techniques. So let's give an applause to both authors of both papers.
Thank you, Francesca. Now, every year, IJCAI itself presents a number of prestigious awards, and to announce those awards will be Michael Woolrich, who is the president of IJCAI's Board of Trustees.
Thank you, Fahiem. So it's my pleasure to be able to announce the winners of this year's roster of IJCAI awards. IJCAI makes a number of awards, and these awards play an important role in the community. Most importantly, they recognize the excellence within our community, those that push the agenda of AI forward, that do outstanding science, that develop outstanding systems, and whose work will live on. But they play more roles than just that. Secondly, they send out a signal to the community about what IJCAI regards as excellent research, and I'm very proud of the award winners this year, which I think all very, very satisfactorily satisfy that criteria. But they play other roles, important roles as well. These awards are the kind of awards that are recognized by international fellowship communities and the like. They help to raise the profile of artificial intelligence and IJCAI itself within the international scientific community. So these awards primarily recognize excellence, but they play many other important roles as well. This year, we're introducing a new award, and this award is named for Marvin Minsky, one of the founders of our field, one of the most influential, charismatic, and interesting AI researchers over the last 70 years. Marvin was a truly remarkable individual. Apart from anything else, he was a member of the MIT faculty for more than half a century. He was present at the Dartmouth Summer School in 1956, where our field took its name. This is the first IJCAI award that has a physical artifact, and there's a picture of it there. And I have it here. We've spent a year working with the Minsky family on designing the Minsky medal. It's designed by the same company that designs the Nobel medals in Sweden, and although you can't see the detail, it is a tremendously handsome thing. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, is it real gold? There is some real gold. These are boom times for AI, but it's not solid gold. We're not that booming yet. But it is a tremendously handsome thing, and I think anybody would be incredibly proud to receive this award. So let me say a little bit about what this award is for. The idea of this award is that over the last decades, we've seen with increasing speed a number of breakthroughs in AI, where AI has made international headlines for example, having AI systems that achieve superhuman performance. And what we want to do with this award is to recognize such achievements. So the award is open continuously. Anybody can nominate. The nomination process is very lightweight. You just have to write a short letter of recommendation and send that to the current IJCAI president. You don't have to do any more than that. And the idea is that if the award recipient is deserving, then it will be sufficiently well known already to the IJCAI Board of Trustees. So anybody can nominate, the nomination process is open, and there is a kind of myth out there in the community that only certain people of certain stature are allowed to nominate. You may be thinking, I'm not allowed to nominate, I'm not sufficiently well known, I don't have sufficient honors or awards. This is nonsense. Anybody can nominate. If you think somebody deserves to receive this award or any of our awards, I urge you, please go ahead and nominate. There is no magic process through this. We can only consider the nominations that we receive. So again, I think this is a tremendously handsome thing. I think anybody would be immensely proud to receive that. So I urge you, please, when things happen that you think deserve to be recognized by this award, go ahead and nominate. So that's the Minsky Medal. We don't yet have a recipient of the Minsky Medal, but I'm confident that we will have a first recipient very soon, and you will all hear about it. So moving on to our established awards, the first award that I want to mention is the Computers and Thought Award. The Computers and Thought Award is IJCAI's research award for researchers under the age of 35, those who are achieving outstanding things at very, very early stages of their career. The certificate of this will be presented, as with the other awards, at the presentation itself, which in this case is on Friday between 2 and 3 in the plenary session. And this year's recipient is Devi Parikh from Georgia Tech. Professor Parikh is recognized for her contributions at the intersection of words, pictures, and common sense, from semantic image understanding to the use of visual attributes for human-machine collaboration and visual abstractions for learning common sense, to enabling humans to interact with visual content via natural language. So congratulations, Devi. The second of our awards is named for the man that gave the name artificial intelligence to our field, John McCarthy, another remarkable individual who achieved so many things, not just in artificial intelligence, but in computer science generally. And this is a mid-career award. It's intended to recognize researchers who are at the full height of their powers, who are currently influencing the field in a dramatic way. The presentation for this will be between 3 and 4 on Friday. And this year's recipient is Dan Roth from the University of Pennsylvania. Dan is recognized for major conceptual and theoretical advances in the modeling of natural language understanding, machine learning, and reasoning. So congratulations, Dan. The IJCAI Research Excellence Award is an award which is intended to recognize essentially a career full of achievement in artificial intelligence, somebody who's been contributing at the highest level throughout their careers. This year's recipient is Andrew Bartow from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He's recognized for his groundbreaking and impactful research in the theory and application of reinforcement learning. Unfortunately, due to health issues, Andrew isn't able to join us this year. He's enthusiastically indicated that he will join us next year, where he will give his presentation. But we should thank and congratulate Andrew for his work here. And finally, the Donald E. Walker Distinguished Service Award. This is famously described as the award for people that don't know how to say no. Events like IJCAI only can happen through immense amounts of hard work by people within the community. And many of you, most of you in the audience, will have contributed to this conference in one way or another, through reviewing papers, through getting involved in the various events. But the Donald E. Walker Distinguished Service Award recognizes those that have given selflessly throughout their career to the field of artificial intelligence, and whose contributions have made a lasting contribution to the development of the field. And I have to say personally that when we give out these rewards, we can give them out to people who give selflessly. But when you give an award to somebody that you've dealt with personally over a number of years, and where the interactions have not just been professional, but have actually been a pleasure, then it makes it a particularly gratifying event. And I'm delighted to be able to say that is exactly the case here. The recipient of this year's award is Ramon Lopez de Montares, Research Professor of the Spanish National Research Council, CSIC, and longtime Director of the AI Research Institute of the CSIC in the University Autónoma de Barcelona. So Ramon, I'd like to ask you to come up and to receive your certificate. Ramon.
Thanks very much, Mike. Thanks very much. Thank you. Dear colleagues, first of all, let me say that I feel really very honored. and extremely grateful to the IJCAI Board of Trustees for this recognition. There are many opinions about receiving awards, and some of these opinions are very interesting and even funny. For instance, George Bernard Shaw modestly said he did not understand why he had received the Nobel Prize, but perhaps the merit was for not having written anything in the last years. A shocked Joseph Brodsky, when he was also given the Nobel, paraphrased backwards astronaut Neil Armstrong and said that the award was a big step for him and a small one for mankind. I do not remember who, but most probably was a mathematician or a logician, said that the first prize he received was due to a mistake, and the following ones were a logical consequence of the first. Well, I do not rule out this possibility in my case. In any case, prize winners should have a good dose of humility and, why not, sense of humor. And I am glad to accept this award with humility and humor, but on top of it with a lot of gratitude. Secondly, just let me express some reflections about our field. We are again living very exciting times, perhaps too exciting. The very recent and very mediatic AI success have triggered unjustified and exaggerated claims and even some apocalyptic predictions about the future of humanity. Both the exaggerated claims and the apocalyptic predictions are due to a lack of understanding of AI. We should be more careful about our claims. In the early 80s, the success of expert systems led also to exaggerated claims about what they could do. And this, among other reasons, caused the so-called AI winter, when the very serious limitations of expert systems became obvious. We are again in the middle of a hyper-hype, when the field focuses too heavily on short-term progress by expecting too much of a single technique, this can lead to a long-term dead end. How effective will be this single technique when applied to new and broader applications other than the limited set of commercial applications currently targeted? Too many PhD students are flocking to deep learning, but there is life in AI outside deep learning. And scientifically speaking, it is a very interesting life, believe me. Well, let me finish by expressing my very deep gratitude, first of all, to my late wife, then to my former PhD students, among them Carlos, as well as to all my present and former colleagues at the Artificial Intelligence Research Institute in Barcelona. Without their support and collaboration, today I would not be here receiving this award. Thank you very much.
To close off the morning, this session, we're just going to have a few words from Chengxi Zhang, who's one of our local organizers. He's going to tell you some local information that will be useful for you.
Firstly, welcome to Melbourne and welcome to IJCAI 2017. We already have 3 days so far. Most important, I hope everyone enjoy yourself here and make your life easy. If you please download event-based application for upload the program, but very minor. So, please feel free to ask questions if you have anyone. First to registration desk and other to the student volunteer. Student volunteer have a yellow T-shirt. And all the black T-shirt is for committee member. If you want to get a souvenir, they have a white T-shirt in the front desk. So feel free to buy one, only $20. It's not much. Please enjoy your stay in Melbourne during IJCAI 2017. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask us. We try to make your life as happy as possible. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy the conference. And now we're going to segue into our first keynote speech, and that will ensure that you're going to enjoy the conference, because you will enjoy that keynote very much. And to introduce that, Carlos will take over.
Okay, so let's get into it. Let's start the scientific program of the conference. So it is my pleasure to introduce Stuart Russell, known for his many, many contributions to artificial intelligence. Who has not used his textbook on artificial intelligence? Around 1,300 universities in 116 countries use this book. Stuart was born in Portsmouth, England, received his Bachelor of Arts degree in first-class honours in physics from Fahiem College in Oxford in 1982, and his PhD in computer science from Stanford University in 1986 for research on inductive reasoning and analogical reasoning. After his PhD, he joined the faculty of the University of California at Berkeley, where since 1996 he is professor of computer science. He also holds an appointment as adjunct professor of neurological surgery at the University of California, San Francisco, where he pursues research in computational physiology and intensive care unit monitoring. In 2016, he co-founded the Center for Human-Compatible Artificial Intelligence at UC Berkeley and is on the Scientific Advisory Board for the Future of Life Institute and the Advisory Board of the Center for the Study of Existential Risk. His work has been internationally recognized with many awards and honors, among them the IJCAI Computers and Thought Award, which was awarded a few minutes back in 1995, and the ACM Carl V. Karlstrom Outstanding Educator Award in 2005. He was appointed to the Blaise Pascal Chair in Paris in 2012 and is also a fellow of ACM and IIIA. Without further ado, please join me welcoming Stuart Russell.
Okay, thank you very much, Carlos. It's wonderful to be here in Melbourne. And let me begin by talking a little bit about some of the progress that's happened in artificial intelligence. If I can figure out how to get the slides to move. Try this one. Okay, good. All right. So this is Lee Sedol, one of the world's greatest Go players, and he's having what we sometimes call a holy cow moment, where he's realizing that, in fact, AI has progressed a lot faster than we expected. It wasn't that long ago that the New York Times predicted it would be 100 years before a computer beat the world champion. And it turned out to be just a couple of years. Here's our robot, whose name is Brett, at Berkeley, and if I can figure out how to get the video to play, we should see Brett doing the laundry. So this is quite an impressive piece of work from my colleague Peter Abeel. And just to show you the rate at which AI is progressing, Brett is soon to be a museum piece. So the Victoria and Albert Museum in London is going to have an exhibition next year, and Brett will be the centerpiece of that exhibition. People hopefully will be able to bring laundry and Brett will fold it for them. Here's a graph that many of you have seen. This is the rate of progress on the ImageNet competition. And you can see that with the advent of deep learning in 2012, the error rate started to plummet to the point now where it's relatively straightforward for an undergraduate to beat the vision performance of a human being on this task, even a human being who spent several weeks training on this particular data set and this particular challenge. So that's very impressive. We could look at an even more impressive task, actually writing captions, not just recognizing objects, but writing captions. Here is a group of people shopping at an outdoor market. There are many vegetables at the fruit stand. So a very impressive task that, 10 years ago, we would have been utterly shocked if that was possible. Now, it doesn't always work, and I'd like to commend the authors of this particular paper on being very honest about the performance limitations of their system. Unlike many vision papers, they actually give examples of where it fails. So here's a street sign, which apparently is a refrigerator filled with lots of food and drinks. Now, when you see that, you wonder, okay, perhaps the performance on the previous example wasn't quite as impressive, that maybe there was some fluke involved or something. So you go back and look at that picture, and the group of people, well, there is no group of people. They're shopping. Well, nobody is shopping, actually, in the picture, and there is no fruit stand. So I think we need, as Ramon said, we need to be a little careful before we announce success in the field of AI, that from now on it's just a matter of bigger data sets and more CPUs, and we'll be reaching human-level AI. I actually believe we're still a long way from that. And I would like to say, in disagreement with Ramon, that those who, for example, like Nick Bostrom, who are predicting possibly negative consequences from superintelligent AI, are actually more pessimistic about the rate of progress. They put the achievement of human-level AI further into the future than the average AI researcher does. So I don't think that the doomsayers, as they're called, are saying that doom is right around the corner, but nonetheless saying that we need to prepare for it eventually, and that's what some of my talk is about. So is deep learning just going to grow and grow and grow until it consumes the entire field? I don't think so. We can ask the deep learning people. Francois Chollet is a very respected deep learning researcher, author of one of the major Python-based deep learning packages and a very impressive textbook. And he writes, many more applications are completely out of reach for current deep learning techniques, even given vast amounts of human annotated data. And I think this is a very important point. Just as in the 1960s, when we were able to solve 3 or 4 step planning problems, we assumed that it was just a matter of time and we'd be able to solve all planning problems. And we forgot about exponential computational complexity. And I think we're in danger now of making the same mistake with data. We are forgetting that limited techniques, knowledge-free learning methods, may, for some tasks, require exponential amounts of data that could neither possibly be learned or in fact could not possibly exist. He goes on to say that the main directions in which I see promise are models closer to general-purpose computer programs as opposed to feed-forward circuits. And I agree, and in fact, there's already a field that does exactly that, called probabilistic programming. So probabilistic programs are formal models in a language that has Turing-equivalent expressive power, which means that any language for writing any probability model is effectively equivalent to or subsumed by one of these probabilistic programming languages. And they have the property, like Bayes nets, that every well-formed probabilistic program denotes a unique distribution over an arbitrarily complex set of worlds with possibly different numbers of objects, different relations among objects, different causal structures, different evolutionary histories over time, and so on. So you can represent extremely complex theories in these languages and bring to bear on any learning problem a great deal of prior knowledge. And they come along with general-purpose inference algorithms, so that in principle, subject to the usual caveats about convergence and computational complexity, because of course all these things are really undecidable, but the general purpose algorithms will find the answer to any query with respect to any model and any data set. And when I give talks about the probabilistic programming research in my group, I often, I'll show the probabilistic program, and I'll show you a couple in a minute. And then I talk about how the algorithm works, and I give some results. And I think what I should do is pretend that these are really deep learning systems, because then the audience would like them much more. And in fact, in some sense, they are. They are automatically, dynamically generating deep generative networks of unbounded width and depth and variable structure during the inference process. And in fact, the one I'm going to show you for seismic monitoring can generate between 100,000 and 500,000 random variables in a fairly deeply connected and very complex network. So let me talk about that seismic monitoring application. This is a small nuclear test that was carried out in Nevada, or this is the aftermath of a small nuclear test that was carried out in Nevada. And in the 50s and 60s, in fact, this used to be a big tourist destination. So people would get on tour buses and drive out and see nuclear tests. They would watch them with glasses, or they would go and look at the crater afterwards. So it was a different time. The largest nuclear test was actually 500 times bigger than this one. And to put an end to testing, in the hope that we would put an end to the nuclear arms race, a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty was proposed, originally in 1958. It's finally opened for signature in 1996. And the treaty comes with a verification arm called the International Monitoring System, which consists of a very large number of monitoring stations around the world, several hundred of these, a large satellite network. In all, it cost over $1 billion, and there's a data processing center in Vienna where all this data is collected and processed in real time in order to detect seismic events and classify ones which might potentially be nuclear explosions. So the evidence, if we formulate this as Bayesian inference, the evidence is the waveforms collected from all these seismic stations, which look like, as you know, seismic wiggles. And so there are 100 of these, terabytes of data every year. The query is what happened? So what were all the seismic events that took place in the last 24 hours? Where did they take place? How big were they? How deep were they? And so here's a little map of seismic events over a 3-month period, and you can see that most of the stuff happens in Southeast Asia. And then the model is what we know about geophysics. So we have an idea about the geographical distribution of natural seismic events. We have knowledge of the physics of signal propagation. We have information about the level of seismic noise in the background of each of the detectors. And we know about how fast signals travel through the Earth and the paths that they take. So all of that geophysics and knowledge, including the uncertainties involved in those models, are expressed in this program, which is written in a probabilistic programming language called BLOG. And this is the entire program. It took about half an hour to write. Once we understood, we went to some sessions in Vienna where they explained to us the nature of the problem and the underlying physics, and it was very straightforward to write this. It took a little longer to get it to run fast enough to handle all the data on a global scale in real time, but that's exactly what it does. It runs an MCMC algorithm in real time, doing Bayesian inference with respect to all the seismic data collected from the world and with respect to this probabilistic model. And to show you the performance, this is the original United Nations automated system, which is the result of about 100 years of seismology research and, as I said, about $1 billion of investment. And this is the failure rate of the system. So this is the fraction of events that the system fails to detect, that then subsequently the human experts have to go back into the data and trawl through it, find all the unexplained blips, and then see if they can reconstruct the events that produce those blips in the data. So it's between 30 and 50% error rate. And the NetVisa system, which is the model that I just showed you, has an error rate between 10 and 14%. So a very substantial reduction in the error rate. And as a result, the United Nations in 2014 announced that NetVisa will become the official monitoring system for the treaty. And here's a little example. This is North Korea. This is a test that took place in February 2013. In fact, it took place the morning that I was giving a talk in Padua. And so I actually had to update the slides to add one to the count of nuclear tests that had taken place. And then my former student, Nima Arora, who actually did all the work, sent me this picture. And so it shows the region in North Korea where the test was suspected to take place. And the top left, the green triangle, is the location that was the consensus location of the combined geophysicists of the world analyzing all the data, and this is where they announced the test to have taken place. This is the net visa location, and then the black cross is subsequently, by satellite imaging, they found the entrance to the tunnel of the testing facility. And so it looks as if NetVisa actually did a better job of locating the event, even though the detectors are 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers away from the testing site. We got within less than a kilometer of the actual site. And subsequently, we built a more sophisticated model, which includes a model of the detailed form of the seismic signals that are produced by each event, depending on the geological location in which they occur. And I'm not going to go through the details of this chart, but just down here, we see that in the low magnitude range, which is the area where we are most worried about the detection capabilities of the seismic network, we're actually detecting 20 times as many events as the combined human machine system that the United Nations is running. So we've really reduced the detection threshold by more than a magnitude on the Richter scale. Here's another blog model, and this one is for natural language understanding. So it's a generative model of text, but it's a little different from the typical generative model. A typical generative model basically says, well, word 12 is on the page because words 11, 10, 9, 8, and 7 were on the page, which is not a very satisfactory explanation. You know, if you were a physicist and someone said, well, that's why text occurs, is because previous text occurred. No, text occurs on the page because there's something true in the world and someone is trying to say it. So let me see if we can express that in blog. So here we go. I'll write it in English. First of all, there are some things in the world, a lot of them, don't know how many. There are some relations in the world, quite a few, don't know how many. And then the relations are expressed by some strings, don't know what they are. And some of the objects are related by some of relations, don't know which ones, and typically not very many. And then people choose some fact, so some relation that holds among objects. They choose one of those things to say, and then they say it. How do they say it? Well, they say it by making the arguments of a relation into the subject and object of the sentence, and the string that describes a relation into the verby bit of the sentence. So that's the generative model, and this is completely unsupervised. So this is the Bayesian model. We provide evidence in the form of sentences from the New York Times. There's a special subset of named entity relationship descriptions that Andrew McCallum's group extracted from the New York Times. And then the query is, what's true in the world? Okay, so this system knows nothing about the actual language. It doesn't know that it's English. It knows nothing about the world. It does not know what relations exist or what objects exist. And then we just give it text and say what's true. And so it runs inference, and here's the result. So here's one of the relations it discovers. It doesn't know what we call it, but it calls it relation number 46. And when you look at these parse strings for the dependency between the two arguments, you see that this relation is the relationship of corporate subsidiaryhood. And in the New York Times, it turns out there are 16 ways that you can describe one thing being a subsidiary of another, and it identifies those 16 and exactly those 16. And then you can ask it, well, what facts are true for relation 46? And you see a whole bunch of facts like this, most of them apparently about advertising agencies, because they're all collected into conglomerates. And we had accuracy rates of over 95% for the relations that we looked at. So this just shows the power of a little bit of prior knowledge and Bayesian inference in a sufficiently expressive language and what you can do with these kinds of techniques. So let me pause then briefly and look at where we are with artificial intelligence. So Andrew Ng has a nice way of describing the current state of the art. It's not perfectly accurate, but as a rule of thumb, he says that if an ordinary person can do something in 1 second, then we can probably make a machine learning system do it if we collect enough data. And I think that's approximately right. We have fairly dexterous, folding towels requires a fair amount of dexterity, for example, but not perfect dexterity. We have wonderfully agile robots. If you look at Boston Dynamics, Big Dog, and Atlas robots, for example, they're really incredibly impressive. And to a large extent, we would say that leg locomotion is pretty much a solved problem. When you look at the agility of the quadcopters, for example, from Vijay Kumar's group, they're unbelievably scary. And so we're in a good position with regard to the physical platforms that we have, although I think the big open problem is still the truly dexterous hand and manipulations using those hands. And the perception is now to the point where it's certainly getting across the threshold of enabling self-driving cars, for example. And that means that we will start to see applications where robots are operating successfully in unstructured environments, in homes, in agriculture, and so on. The other areas where we might see better performance as a result of improved perception and also improved modeling is the smart home, which has been just about to happen for the last 50 years or so. Literally, I mean, there were smart homes being designed and built 50 years ago. They just weren't very smart. The AI part was hopeless, and so it was an unbelievable nuisance to live in one of these houses. But that, I think, is going to be solved fairly soon. We're not going to have real natural language understanding for a while, but we'll have natural language understanding that's sufficient to build web-scale question-answering systems. And we're already seeing, for example, Google is gradually shifting from returning the results of keyword indexing to actually returning the answer to your question. Another application of shallow natural language understanding will be the personal digital assistant. A lot of those are available right now, but they're done by Wizard of Oz technique. There's actually a whole lot of humans on the other end of that system and not AI, but it's very clear what's going to happen in that sector. And other amazing tools will arise, I think, for doing country-scale micro-modeling of economic processes and all kinds of medical and scientific research. So there's still a lot missing, and I think Ramon was correct to say we are not close to having human-level AI. We don't have real understanding of language. We don't really understand how to integrate learning with knowledge. And one of my favorite areas is to figure out how it is that humans manage to make decisions on scales. So with respect to our primitive actions, our primitive steps, which are motor control actions, coming to IJCAI is more than 1 billion steps. Now, AlphaGo does successful decision-making on the scale of 20 to 30, and that was considered an amazing achievement, right? But there's nothing that's going to scale 20 to 30 up to billions of steps. Now, clearly, we don't do look ahead in detail. We don't plan out the billions of steps that we're going to take. But we plan it out at some multiple levels of abstraction in a very complicated interlocking hierarchy of activities. And this is still something that's in its infancy in artificial intelligence, particularly the discovery of that hierarchy. How do we build it in the first place? And similar remarks apply to our development of concepts and theories. So when you think about physics, how many layers of concepts are built up before you get to the Higgs boson? It's centuries of discovery and invention of those concepts, and we don't know how to do any of that really in AI. Now, it's not the case that just adding more CPUs and faster CPUs or quantum CPUs is going to solve these problems. And all that's going to do is get the wrong answer more quickly. So it's going to require these conceptual breakthroughs, but it's hard to predict exactly when those conceptual breakthroughs are going to occur. And some of you may have seen this before in some other talks, but I want to re-emphasize the unpredictability of these kinds of conceptual breakthroughs and the significance of the breakthrough when it does happen. So this is Ernest Rutherford, who was the equivalent of the president of IJCAI, if you like. He was the distinguished senior figure of nuclear physics in his time. And he gave a number of speeches. This is just one of them on September 11th in 1933 in Leicester, where he said, "Anyone who looks for a source of power in the transformation of the atoms is talking moonshine." And this was reported all over the world, and he was absolutely adamant that all this talk of extracting the energy that they knew to be there in the atom. They knew exactly how much energy there was because of relativity theory, and he was adamant that we would never get it out. And this is Leo Szilard, and he read a summary of this speech in the Times, and he went out for a walk, and as he was crossing the road, he figured out the answer, which is to have a neutron-induced nuclear chain reaction, which would create the possibility of a nuclear explosion. And he also figured out how to have a damped negative feedback system, which would enable you to maintain it just at the subcritical level where you could have nuclear power. And he patented both ideas fairly soon after that. So it went from never, completely impossible, to pretty much solved, at least on the conceptual level, within 16 hours. So I would say do not bet against human ingenuity and do not bet the future of humanity on our inability to solve the problem of AI. So I'm going to state this as a premise, and you could say, I'm not making this as a definite claim, but at least I would say I don't believe the negation of this premise, which is that it's impossible that we will ever reach AI, human-level AI or superhuman AI. And I find it a bit distressing when I see senior members of the AI community stating in print that we will never achieve human-level AI. The field has spent 60 years fending off the critics who said that, you guys are too stupid, you have no idea what you're talking about, you're never going to have human-level AI, it's impossible. And we've spent 60 years fighting off that criticism, and now, when it seems like it might be possible, we're saying, oh, no, it's never going to happen, so there's no possible risk of that. Right? That seems like a defensive reaction that's not based in real thought. So if this is true, if systems will be able to use, for example, their ability to read everything that the human race has ever written, they'll have a lot more information than any human being does. We've already seen in AlphaGo that they're better at doing look-ahead, and if we solve the hierarchical long timescale issues, then they'll be able to look further into the future with more accuracy than we can, and so they'll be able to out-decide us as humans. So this has some wonderful consequences. I don't want to say that better AI is necessarily bad. It's actually extraordinarily good, because everything we have comes from our intelligence, so if we have access to more of it, this cannot be anything but a step change in civilization, in our capability to improve the overall quality of human life to the greatest extent that's ever happened. So it's a very amazing opportunity. Now, people talk about the downsides, and some of them are actually quite immediate. Here's one of them. This notion of using artificial intelligence to develop weapons that can choose to kill humans. In fact, there's two downsides in this slide. I'm only going to mention the killer robot one. People talk a lot about the issue of employment. This is still very much subject to debate. I think gradually the economics community is coming around to the idea that, in fact, this is real. I was at a meeting where there were several Nobel Prize-winning economists, and they all said that this is the biggest problem facing the world economy. But this is what I want to talk about. AI possibly being the end of the human race, and what could that mean? right? And there is a lot of noise about this in the press, and some of it may look as if it's scaremongering, but I think you have to remember that what the press does is take anything you say, multiply it by 1,000, take out the bits you actually said, and then report the results. And so you have to filter what you read in the media to understand, probably, to guess what was actually said. So if you remember, for example, there was a report a couple of years ago that was written by several people in the community called Research Agenda for Robust and Beneficial AI, which was the most boring document that we could write. It did not have the word risk, it did not have the word extinction, existential, none of that stuff. It just said the only mention of anything down, any kind of downside was that it was important to understand both the benefits and the potential pitfalls of progress in artificial intelligence. And still, journalists published articles with Terminator robots all over them and said that Elon Musk was predicting the end of the world, and so on and so forth. So, and this is one of the reactions among many from the AI community, right? Well, the people who are talking about this, they don't know anything about AI, right? They're not even real scientists. Well, some of them are real scientists. And here's one example. If we could keep the machines in a subservient position, for instance, by turning off the power at strategic moments, we should, as a species, feel greatly humbled. So who said this? Was it one of these media pontificators? No, this was Alan Turing, 1951. And this is one of the sources of unease that people might have, right? You make something that's more intelligent than you are, what do you think's going to happen? So that unease, we could call it the gorilla problem, because the gorillas did it, or at least their ancestors did it a few million years ago. They produced the human species, which is a lot more intelligent than the gorillas. And they're having a meeting here to discuss whether it was a good idea. And you can kind of tell from their general sort of demeanor and body language that they're really pretty unhappy about that decision. It was a terrible idea to produce the human species, because now they're in a lot of trouble. But if that's the only source of unease, there's really not much we can do about it, except stop, right? And then we don't get any of the benefits. So we have to understand, just as with other powerful technologies, like the nuclear technology, clearly nuclear weapons were a potential downside of nuclear technology. So the fact that uranium sufficiently enriched and a large enough mass of uranium explodes is a downside of nuclear physics. So how do you prevent the explosion, right? Reasonable question. But to do that, you have to understand why it explodes and then figure out how to prevent it. So why is better AI a problem? Right? What is the nature of the process by which something bad could happen? And this is another quote: "We'd better be quite sure that the purpose put into the machine is the purpose which we really desire." And this is the core of the issue. And this was pointed out by Norbert Wiener in 1960, the founder of cybernetics, brilliant mathematician. And he actually wrote this having just seen Arthur Samuel's checker playing program learn to play checkers much better than Arthur Samuel could play. And he sort of extrapolated from there, and he was very explicit that this is not an immediate thing, this is something on a very large time scale, but what we do now is going to have consequences on that very large time scale. That makes it very difficult to know what is the right choice, but because of the scale of the consequences, we have to think extremely hard about it. Now, you could also attribute this quote to King Midas, because he had the same problem. He put a purpose into the machine: I want everything I touch to turn to gold. He got exactly what he asked for, and then his food and drink and relatives turned to gold, and he died in misery and starvation. And this is ubiquitous in human mythology. There's the genie who asks for 3 wishes. The third wish is always, please undo the first 2 wishes, because I made a mess of it. Right? We are terrible at specifying what it is we really want, and that's the nature of the problem. If we don't get it right the first time and you put it into a super intelligent machine, then you're going to face a competition between you and the machine, because now you don't have the same objective, you have different objectives. And so it's a non-cooperative game. Now, more recently, Steve Omohundro wrote a paper talking about what's called instrumental goals. And these are the goals that follow as a consequence of any original prime objective. So, for example, even if the objective is something as simple as fetching the coffee, a sufficiently intelligent machine realizes that if someone switches it off, it won't be able to fetch the coffee. And therefore, because it has the objective of fetching the coffee, it necessarily has the objective of preserving its own existence. So we don't build in self-preservation. Asimov's third law, that the robot's supposed to preserve itself, is completely unnecessary, because it's a logical consequence of any other objective. There are very few things you can do better when you're dead than when you're alive, except for putrefying. So this is the takeaway message. Just remember this one thing: you can't fetch the coffee if you're dead. Okay. Now, if you combine this notion that a system is going to preserve itself against any attempt to interfere with its pursuit of the goal, it will also try to acquire computational, physical, financial resources to improve the probability of success, to ward off any possibility of failure, and you combine that with misalignment in the objectives, then you get not the Terminator robot, which is the sort of spontaneous malevolent consciousness problem, but you get the 2001 Space Odyssey. You get HAL, because HAL has that objective which is not aligned with those of the two humans on the spaceship, and he ends up in conflict with the humans on foot. Or I guess, fortunately for the humans, HAL is not super intelligent. Eventually, Dave does outwit HAL and manage to turn him off. But had HAL really been super intelligent, that would not have happened. So, I'm not sure what happened to this slide. Anyway, so it says reasons not to pay attention. And there are a lot of them. And I think the AI community is coming up with one after another reason to ignore this issue, because it's a difficult issue. It makes you worried. It makes you feel under attack. It makes you feel like you might be a bad person if you're contributing to the extinction of the human race. I think that's the wrong response. Denial is not going to solve the problem. So one of those responses, as I mentioned, is it will never happen. Right? And I'll just refer you back to Rutherford and Szilard in 1933. There's a response, well, it might eventually happen, but it's too soon to worry about it. Well, what's too soon, right? If I said that, you know, a giant asteroid is going to hit the Earth in, I guess that's 49 years' time, would you say, okay, well, that's too soon to worry about it? Too soon. Just, you know, come back in 2064 and we'll have another conversation. No, that's not what would happen. We would immediately put the entire scientific and engineering community of the planet Earth into action to try to figure out how to deflect or destroy this asteroid before it hits the Earth. Because we don't know how long it's going to take to solve the problem. And we don't know how long it's going to take to solve the problem of controlling intelligent systems that are more capable than ourselves. So there's a lot more reasons, which I won't go through. You can read them as they go by. I do want to point to one of these. Yeah, you can't control research. That's another response. Well, you know, yes, you're right. It is going to destroy the human race, but there's nothing we can do about it. It's just going to happen because we're going to continue doing research. Well, that isn't true. We've controlled the genetic engineering of humans for more than 40 years, and that might be breaking down right now, but clearly there is evidence that when we put our minds to it as a community, we can decide what to do and what not to do. I'm not necessarily recommending that we stop doing AI research. What I'm recommending is that we work on solving the problem. I'm not going to talk about, yeah, we won the Luddite of the Year award, but that's kind of odd because the Luddites include Turing, Minsky, Norbert Wiener, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, so some of the major technological figures of the 20th century. It's hard to describe these people as Luddites, but don't worry, we can just switch it off. right? This is something that I've heard very senior and successful, intelligent, brilliant AI people saying as a reason not to even think about this problem. Well, of course, it's probably likely that a superintelligent system would think of that. And here's another one. Yeah, don't mention the risks. It's bad for funding. I'm not kidding. This is, again, in writing from very senior figures in the artificial intelligence field. And I would just point to the history of nuclear power, where the nuclear industry did not mention the risks, and anyone who talked about the risk was treated as, you know, some kind of pinko commie who needed to be silenced. And then 3 Mile Island happened, and then Chernobyl happened, and the nuclear industry was destroyed by its own insistence that there were no risks. So this is not a profitable strategy, nor is it an honorable one. Okay, so let's assume that I've convinced you. Now you're asking, I hope, what do we do? Okay, what do we do? All I can do is tell you what I think I'm going to try to do. We set up a Center for Human-Compatible AI, and the goal is to figure out how do we make AI systems that are provably beneficial, right? That cannot act in ways where we are post hoc unhappy with what they did, or we might be dead, in which case we're very unhappy with what they did. And there are actually a lot of other groups now working on this problem. There's the Future of Humanity Institute, there's the CSER in Cambridge, which also has a new center called the Center for the Future of Intelligence, funded by the Leverhulme Trust. There's MIRI, Machine Intelligence Research Institute, the Future of Life Institute, OpenAI. The Partnership on AI has among its goals to solve these problems. And funding agencies and professional societies are getting the idea and trying to help solve this problem. So provably beneficial AI it's almost an oxymoron, because provably makes you think about theorems, beneficial makes you think about touchy-feely, wishy-washy, goody-woody kinds of things, and it's hard to put those two things together. So what I mean by that is the following, right? We're not going to be able to prove beneficial, an AGI that lands from outer space, right? And a lot of the literature in the AGI community, I think, sort of views the AGI as just some black box that landed from outer space and is arbitrarily intelligent and has arbitrary objectives. Well, if that's the problem, we can't solve it. We are toast. But that isn't the problem. We have to figure out how to design things to avoid these problems in the first place. So we're going to have a formal framework, a formal definition of what is the problem that we want to build the system to solve. Let's call that the F framework, and we're going to build F solvers. And we have to operate under the assumption that this F solver can be arbitrarily capable, that the components out of which it's constructed can be arbitrarily good at the job that those components have in the architecture. But if we design the training regimen, i.e. the objective function for learning, and the way the subsystems are connected and so on, if we do it in the right way, we want to be able to prove that the human is going to be better off with the system that we're designing. So there are 3 simple ideas on how to do this. One is that the robot's only objective is to maximize the realization of human values. So this is its only objective. And I'll say in a second what I mean by human values. It's probably not what you think. The second point is that the robot has to be uncertain about what the values are. This is crucial. The robot should never believe that it knows for sure what the objective is, unless it is in fact correct about what the objective is. And then the third thing is the robot has to learn something about the objective, and it does that by primarily by observing human behavior. The human choice behavior provides, in some sense, ground truth, and it's a complicated sense, ground truth about the underlying human objectives. So let me rephrase that to get rid of this possibly problematic notion of human values. We'll talk about POFLs instead. So POFLs are preferences over future lives. So this is what I really mean. I don't mean that the machine is trying to somehow develop by observing humanity an ideal ethical theory. That's not what this is about. This is just about the ability for a machine to predict what each person would prefer their life to be like, and then to try and help them get that. So why is uncertainty in the objective important? It's important because it's a form of humility, and that humility is what allows the machine to be controlled by us humans and to be safe. And you might ask, well, okay, we've had uncertainty in AI since the late 70s. We've really focused centrally on uncertainty, on certain sensory information, on certain transition models in Markov decision processes, and so on. But we've always assumed that the objective is known for sure perfectly. And why is that? Well, if you actually look at the definition of MDP, if you add uncertainty to the reward function, it doesn't matter, because you get exactly the same optimal policy whether you have a distribution over objectives or you replace that distribution by its expectation, because everything is linear and it just works out that way. So in an MDP and a POMDP, uncertainty in the objectives has no effect on the optimal policy, unless the environment can provide additional information about the objective. So the irrelevance of uncertainty only holds in environments that cannot provide information about the objective. But as I just said, anything that a human does in the world provides information about that human's objectives. And so the standard formulation of MDPs and POMDPs is actually inadequate to handle this issue. So observable human actions are one source. We could also just have, a special kind of action is to just give a reward signal, as happens in reinforcement learning. So the general theory of how AI is going to work has to include both the human and the machine as agents. So thinking of the agent itself, making decisions with respect to its own objectives, is a special case that's actually extremely restrictive. And I think there was probably a mistake that this is the way we've thought about AI for quite a while. And inevitably then, the human is going to have special status in this theory. And if you sort of look at it, of course it's going to have special status, because we're not doing AI for the benefit of bacteria, right? We're doing AI for our benefit. And so we're bound to have, just as in economics, there's a theory called principal agent theory. The principal is supposed to be benefiting from the work of the agent. And that's what AI is supposed to be about. We're building these intelligent systems to help us. So here's a graphical model way of thinking about it, right? Here's the classical idea, right, that there's a human objective which is observed, right? And it affects human behavior, but it's also given to the machine and defines the machine behavior. And so the fact that that variable is observed then decouples the machine behavior from the human behavior. In fact, once the machine has the objective, it doesn't care what the human does, right? It's completely irrelevant. But in fact, this is not really the case, because really the human objective is not directly observed. We don't know the full preference over future lives that human beings have. And so when the human objective is not observed, then the human and machine behaviors remain coupled. This is a notional graphical model. I'm not trying to be too mathematical here, but this is an inevitable consequence that this becomes a multi-agent problem. So let me give a few simple examples. One, image classification. We're all aware of Google's PR disaster when their image classifier classified some people as gorillas. Well, how did that happen? I'm betting, I haven't actually asked them what happened, but I'm betting that they were using a standard machine learning algorithm that minimizes the squared loss, and the loss comes from the loss matrix, which tells you the cost of misclassification, and they didn't even bother to write the loss matrix, right? They just assumed it was uniform. And that was an incorrect description of their true value function. So how should it have gone? The machine learning system should have not a loss matrix, but a distribution over loss matrices, which is a much more complicated, high-dimensional thing. And it should refuse to classify some of the examples because it's not sure that might be too risky until it knows more about the details of the loss matrix. It should say, I don't know what this is, or I'm not going to say what it is, or what I think it is, because it's too risky. And maybe ask the human to help out and say, you know, is this a bad idea to classify one of these as potentially one of those? And so you get a much more complex and rich interaction between the learning algorithm and the owner of the learning algorithm to make sure that you don't have those kinds of disasters. Another example is just going back to this fetching the coffee. So when you fetch the coffee, traditionally we viewed that as just a goal for a planning system, right? And in utility theoretic terms, that would mean that any state where you have the coffee, you know, has value 1, and any state where you don't have the coffee has value 0. I'm simplifying, but we viewed it as a specification for what successful behavior means. That's completely untrue, right? If I said to the robot, fetch the coffee, and I was in a really expensive hotel in Paris, and it came back, you know, and had charged 31 euros to my credit card to buy a cup of coffee, I would have said, you idiot, you know, why did you pay 31 euros for a cup of coffee? Why, you know, you could have gone somewhere else or just come back and said it's too expensive. You know, you certainly wouldn't want the system to, you know, kill all the other people in Starbucks so that it could get the coffee more quickly. And so on. So there's a lot of stuff involved, and you might say, well, if the robot doesn't know all these things, how is it going to be any use whatsoever until it's sort of learned all the things you care about? It's just going to be paralyzed. Well, actually, that's not quite true, because as long as it leaves the rest of those things, if it doesn't know whether you really care about them or really don't care about them, if it doesn't know the value of all the other attributes of the environment, as long as it doesn't mess with them, then the instruction fetch the coffee says, you know, I would be better off if I had coffee than not, all other things being equal. So leave all the other things being equal, and you can still be useful to the human, even though you have a great degree of uncertainty about their overall preference structure. Let me briefly talk, I think I'm going to run over a little bit. Let me briefly talk about value alignment. So how do we get the values actually aligned? How do we learn more about values by observing human actions? So there's a subfield of AI called inverse reinforcement learning, which is the inverse of reinforcement learning. Instead of learning behavior from rewards, we learn rewards from observing behavior. And this seems to work quite well because, you know, if you think about it the other way around, when I want to get behavior out of a machine, the reward function is usually the most concise way to describe what I want. So I can get great Go playing behavior out of a machine just by telling it what it means to win and lose at Go. That's the only thing that we tell AlphaGo along with the rules. We just tell it what it means to win and lose, and it figures out how to behave from that information. So it's a succinct explanation for arbitrarily complex behaviors. Now, we actually want something more sophisticated than that because, as I said, the human has to be involved. The human's behavior is coupled in, and we really need a two-player game, or in general, and you know, it'll be N humans and M robots, but just think about one human and one robot. So the human acts according to their own internal preference structure, and but may not be able to explicate it exactly. The robot has to optimize with respect to that preference structure, but doesn't know what it is. So that's the game. And when you solve that game, you find the Nash equilibria have exactly the properties that you hope. That the robot will ask questions before it does anything rash. The human will try to teach the robot by demonstration what the human does and doesn't like. So let me illustrate one very simple instantiation of this called the off-switch problem. So in the off-switch problem, the robot has the objective, like fetch the coffee, and as Alejandro pointed out, it has an incentive immediately to then disable its off switch so that nothing can prevent it from getting the coffee. And we don't want that to happen, right? That seems like an extremely unsafe development if that's how machines are going to behave. So how do we stop it, right? I mean, it seems like it's just a logical consequence of the objective that we gave it. But somehow we have to stop it. And it's no good saying, well, just give it a rule saying it's not allowed to disable the off switch, because it has an incentive to disable the off switch. So just as we find ways around tax laws, it will find ways around any attempt to prevent it from disabling the off switch. So the answer is, once you have uncertainty about the objective, once the machine knows that it doesn't know the full objective, then it has an incentive because the human will only switch the robot off if the robot's doing something or is about to do something that human doesn't like. The robot doesn't know what that is, but it knows that it doesn't want to do things the human doesn't like. That's rule number one. And so it should actually be quite happy to be switched off if it's uncertain about the objective. And you can prove this mathematically, that there's a positive incentive to allow yourself to be switched off, and that incentive is in some sense monotonically related to the amount of uncertainty you have about the objective. And when you design the robot that way, you can show that it's provably beneficial to the human. Microsoft PowerPoint has stopped working. I don't know what to do about that. Okay. Okay, I may have to zoom through this a bit. Okay, so if you want more details, those are the two papers that are in the proceedings, on one this afternoon and one on Thursday. So please go, my students will be presenting those papers. So here's just a little preview of how it's set up. So it's an incredibly simple model just to illustrate this concept. So the robot gets to go first in this game, and it can choose to either do some action immediately, so sort of bypassing the off switch, and that action has some value UA, which is unknown. So there's a distribution over the values because it doesn't know how much the human will like this action. Or the robot can just switch itself off, so it can just commit suicide because it believes it's not good enough to act, right? But a third choice is to say, okay, let me give the human an opportunity to switch me off. So we tell the human, okay, I'd like to do A, but I'm going to wait, and you can switch me off. Okay? Then the human can choose to switch the robot off, in which case it gets value 0. Or it can say, well, I'm not going to switch you off, I'm going to allow you to do action A. So then the robot will do action A. And what does the robot believe at that point about the value of the action? Well, it knows that it must be bigger than 0, otherwise the human would have switched me off. And so it has a posterior distribution that looks like that, right? The negative part of distribution has now been conditioned out. And you can show very simply that in this case, waiting and allowing the human to switch you off is always preferred to either switching yourself off or bypassing the off switch and just doing the action. And this is a completely straightforward theorem. It's exactly like a non-negative value of information theorem. In fact, that's what it is, because the human's decision is providing information to the robot about what the utility function is. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over how we solve the wire heading problem, but we can talk about that afterwards. And just let me wrap up by saying I am reasonably optimistic that this research agenda is going to be fruitful, and we've already, I think, made a little bit of progress along the line towards provably beneficial AI. So one reason for optimism is that sufficiently intelligent AI systems, particularly ones that can read, will have access to arbitrarily large amounts of data about human behavior, because everything we've ever written describes people doing things and then other people being upset about it. So that's good, right? So we can go look at everything the human race has written and learn a lot from that. Another reason for optimism is that there's actually a very strong economic incentive to solve this problem long before we get to super intelligent AI. So let me just give you one example, right? So here's the domestic robot, and domestic robot's home, and you're late from work, and the kids are hungry, and there's nothing in the fridge. And then the robot sees the cat. And something happens. The robot, of course, doesn't know the nutritional value of the cat. is not as high as the sentimental value of the cat. And so, so the cat gets cooked for dinner. Right, so this one incident would be the end of the domestic robot industry, right? Because it lacks a certain form of common sense. We've thought up to now of common sense knowledge as being about, what happens when you spill the milk, or putting blocks on top of each other and things like that. But a lot of human common sense is about what people want and don't want. And really, we don't really distinguish between these kinds of knowledge. Our mathematical theories do. One is transition model and one is value function. But humans are expected to learn the value function properly, and if they don't, they're considered psychopaths. And no one wants to have a psychopathic domestic robot. So that would be a strong incentive to get it right. There are some difficulties. Right? I'm not saying this is straightforward. I think it's decades of research to really get it right. That's one reason to start work on it now. And it's really us, right? Because to understand what we want, even assuming that there is some way of describing us as wanting something, having any kind of stable, meaningful preference over human lives, so assuming that we do, we have to invert our behavior to get at it. And our behavior is produced by our cognitive system, which is incredibly complicated, computationally limited, and very, very inconsistent. So we have to invert through this whole complexity of human psychology, which of course seems to be a difficult problem. So there are some drawbacks. But let me just point out, for example, computationally limited. When Lee Sedol played, there was probably one move where he changed the game theoretic value of his game from maybe drawn or won to lost. So he made a losing move. Now, if the system observes that losing move, it shouldn't say, oh, Lee Sedol wanted to lose the game, right? He was actually trying to win, but his computational limitations prevented him from making winning moves. So we have to understand human computational limitations, as well as computational limitations of machines, in order to understand human behavior. We have to understand how our behavior is generated, and it's generated actually from an extremely complicated, multi-layered hierarchy of interlocking subroutines of behavior. I'm in the giving a talk at IJCAI subroutine, and there are many things I can't do in this subroutine. I can't sort of pick a baseball out of my pocket and throw it at the audience. I can't, take out my phone and start buying AT&T stock. It's just not part of this subroutine. So we have to understand the subroutine structure of human behavior in order to understand what someone is doing. And a lot of us are nasty. Now, I want to point out, just because we're nasty does not mean the robot is going to act like us, right? This is just not the case. We are nasty often because we are selfish and we don't care that much about the well-being of others, and we have our own objectives to pursue. But the robot is purely altruistic. It doesn't have any objectives except those of the people it's trying to help. It doesn't have to act in a nasty way in order to do that. So it's just learning to predict what people want, and it is not learning to want those things. There is one caveat to this, that if people actually have a negative sign on the well-being of others, we don't want the robot to take that into account in how it trades off the well-being of those two people, right? So I think we have to sort of filter out one aspect of people's value functions, which is the pleasure they derive from the unhappiness of other people. And I don't see a way around that. If someone can figure out a different solution, I'd be very happy. So just to summarize, I think that if we follow the path that we have been on, which is building intelligent systems into which we put objectives, then we do face this risk from misalignment, and that's a serious problem. But if we change the way we think about AI from this unary notion that there's an intelligent system with objectives that it somehow has and is pursuing, to a notion where the only objectives reside in us, and the machine is simply there to try to help us with those objectives, that's actually a better way of thinking about what AI should be. And it solves this problem of misalignment and seems to give us some degree of safety. And if you're worried about the old form of AI, don't worry. It is just a special case where the uncertainty is reduced to zero, and the machine is absolutely positive it knows what the objective is. But it seems to me that in doing this work, the actual nature of humans is going to be inextricably intertwined with our field, and that's a change, and it makes me nervous because actual humans are extremely complicated. But I think we have to do this. I think we have to also not think about this as a separate field of AI safety. And draw the analogy to civil engineering. When a civil engineer says, I build bridges, he doesn't need to add, oh, but I'm a safety bridge designer, and I design bridges that don't fall down, right? It's built into the meaning of the word bridge that it's not supposed to fall down. And it should be built into the meaning of the word AI that is beneficial to us. And we shouldn't approach this as there's AI researchers and then there's the safety people nagging and the ethics people nagging the AI researchers. It should be just intrinsic to what we do as a field. And I think in the process of making our preferences over future lives and our value structures more explicit, we may actually become better ourselves. Thank you. And sorry for running over.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
For the sake of time, I think we will skip the session, the questions. I mean, you can meet Stuart during the week and talk to him. So now we are going to break for coffee. There will be coffee served outside, but also on the second level. So some of you can go to the second level for coffee. Make sure you are at the session at 10:30 sharp, okay?